This is where we are as a culture.
Yeah.
And, you know, we dismiss it as lunatic leftism, right? But it's really not. There is a very distinct, you know, when I think about this, and when children in public school are being taught today that if we don't fix global warming, the world's going to end in 12 years. It is all the same thing. It is psychological terrorism.
Right.
That's what it is. And when they try to impose this on children, think about that. Children do not have brains developed enough to process this. It's sadistic.
Right.
It's sadistic. There's no other way to put it. And so we, as a culture, are forced to either go along, and they would encourage us to go along joyfully, or be absolutely outraged. Those are our choices. Capitulate or infuriate. Capitulate or explode. Those are our choices, right? That's a strategy. There's a method to their madness. And that's what I talk about in the red-green axis. Here's the red. Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, and this guy in the middle. Who's ever seen him or heard of him before? Nobody, right? I'll tell you, because he's the most important radical that ever existed, even more than Marx. And the green, of course, are the colors of Islam. So it's the red-green axis. And I'm not talking here about all Muslims. I am talking about the Muslim activist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood and its association, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, psychological tactics, misinformation. That's what it's about. We are a powerful conventional military force. Why would anybody in their right mind attack us by conventional means? It'd be kind of like the charge of the Light Brigade. Although those guys did win ultimately. But it's an insane way to go about it. They have a much better way to go about it. That is to use the thing that made our country great, our open society. Yep. Our free markets, our First Amendment rights, our Bill of Rights. All those things provide open opportunity for the enemy to attempt to subvert us. And so that's what they're doing. And this is one of the ways they're doing it. It's a multi-front strategy. It includes mass immigration, stealing elections, all of these things, indoctrinating children, corrupting culture. So who is this? This is Sergei Nechayev. He wrote in 1869 something called the Revolutionary Catechism. And his group was called the Nihilists, first time that term was used. He adopted for himself the credo, the ends justify the means. That is the credo of the National Democratic Party today and the left. Comes straight from him. The Revolutionary Catechism is a 3-page document that was the template for all subsequent communist revolutions. It even includes an order of execution for those people who are not going to survive. It anticipates the destruction of the Western world as we know it and agitates and promotes that. That's the plan. And here's what he said. Their goal is only our ultimate happiness. But in order to get that, they need an all-destroying revolt. So, to meet those ends, the society will use its resources and energy toward increasing and intensifying the evils and miseries of the people until at last their patience is exhausted. There you have it, right? It's exactly what's happening today. That's what the transgender agenda is about. That's what the open borders agenda is about. That's what all their agendas are about. Driving us, polarizing us, dividing us, and conquering us along ethnic, racial, age, sexual, any kind of divisions they can exploit and inflame. That's the game. And now this guy, you probably never heard of him either, Willy Munzenberg. He was in Lenin's inner circle. Look what he says. We must organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink. Only then, if they have corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose the dictatorship of the proletariat. So here he is again talking about using the Chayev strategy targeted towards culture, corrupting our culture. And who was going to do it for them? They weren't planning on getting the working class to come out and revolt. They knew way back then that that was a non-starter. They were going to use the intellectuals, the college professors, the people in arts and media, the people who think they know better than everybody else and who can be flattered by their towering egos. That's who. And here's another one, George Lukács. You probably haven't heard of him either. He was, would you put him alone in a room with your kids? I wouldn't even let him in the house. I might pull out the shotgun. But he, and they all said the same thing. Revolutionary destruction of society is the only solution to the cultural contradictions of the epoch. They all said similar words. He was the Minister of Culture in the Soviet Hungarian Republic in 1919. And he imposed something that he called cultural terrorism. Guess what it was? Sex education to children and a nationwide campaign to convince women to divorce their husbands and go out and have sex with anybody. That was his cultural terrorism in 1919. Now, the Belakoon government lasted only a few months because they were invaded by the Czechoslovaks, and the Hungarian people said, come on, take them, get rid of these folks. They only lasted a few months. But this guy, along with Willie, inspired something called the Frankfurt School, which was created in 1923 after something called a Marxist Study Week, which of course was sponsored by the spoiled brat rich kid's son of a German industrialist named Hermann Wiehl. And they were so enthralled by Munzenberg's ideas about organizing the intellectuals and Lukács' ideas about using sex as a weapon that they created something called the Frankfurt School. And Frankfurt School had to relocate to Germany in 1933 because they fled the Nazis, right? They were all communists, they were all Jewish, or most of them. So they fled the Nazis. They were relocated in Columbia Teachers College under the program run by Edward R. Murrow, who later became CBS News anchor. Virulent anti-American, probably a communist. And John Dewey was the father of public education, and at the time he was the president of the National Education Association. So that's where those concepts began to be seeded in our public schools and in our Ivy League universities. And so they created something called critical theory. Marx had said, even before he wrote his Communist Manifesto, that they should engage in a ruthless criticism of everything existing. And so the Frankfurt School created critical theory in response to that. And you can see what they all did. Racism, fences, sex and homosexual children, change, I mean, all of this, okay? This is all they promoted. And they had a 10-year trial in Germany before they had to flee Hitler. And they tried to impose cultural Marxism, which is, another word for critical theory, which is another word for political correctness. All came from the same source. They imposed that in Germany, and by the end of that time, Germany was the most morally corrupt, degenerate, debauched country throughout Europe. And that was typified by, remember the movie Cabaret? Where Liza Minnelli was dancing with all the trans guys. There's a picture of it. This was Germany pre-war. And what happens? Now, remember I said this is a asymmetric strategy of military conquest. They don't like the idea of their kids being turned into transgenders any more than we do. But they recognize the utility of that strategy to destroy our culture, right? And what happens when you destroy a culture, when you corrupt it? Well, what is a corrupt society that's engaged in all kinds of perverted sexual activity and whatever else, drug use, alcohol use, gambling, just off the charts behavior? What is that? What is the primary thing there? What is it everybody share in common? Just an absolute gross self-centeredness, utter self-absorption, right? And when you're in that position, you notice what's happening around you? No, you're only preoccupied with satisfying whatever particular proclivities or needs you have. And you think it's your right, you demand it, and all that other garbage, right? Yep. And so, in this movie, towards the end, when they're all dancing on this, they do a pan of the audience, and you see all the Nazi uniforms that nobody's noticing because they're too preoccupied. They're too easily misled because they're not paying attention. Yeah. And that's what's happening here. That's what has happened here. We've been misinformed. We've been lied to. We've been denied information. We've been denied the true story of our nation's history, its founding, why it is not, whether or not it is a truly exceptional nation, but why? Why? It's not because we're white, right? White supremacy is not a thing. I mean, Hitler was white. Stalin was white. Not necessarily something to brag about. We made this country great because we listened to the Word of God. That's why. That's why. The founding documents on our nation implicitly recognized the wisdom and power and ultimate authority of a supreme being. Right? How can you argue with that? No human has been able to come up with that kind of wisdom. And the power and the consequences of that have been reflected for 200 years in a country that has become the most prosperous in the world, a beacon of freedom for everybody in the world to come to. And so, that very aspect of our society has become the target of our enemies. Because they can and will never accomplish what we have, and just by our very existence, we're a threat. Yeah. Whether we, sign peace agreements, limit nuclear weapons, whatever we do, we will never satisfy them because our very existence challenges their authority. We need to go. And they've known that from the very beginning. We've been the main enemy, and that's the goal. And the leftists in this country, along with their Islamist allies, are all on board with that. So, now we have another issue. And you've got to think of this all comprehensively as part and parcel of the same thing. It's all part of the same agenda. This is just a different angle on it. So, Muskegon's going to become a sanctuary county. Yesterday, this was Montgomery County, Maryland, near where I live. These are friends of mine. I don't know Michelle Malkin. She does follow me on Twitter, Michelle Malkin. But what's his name? Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch was there. A lot of my friends were there. I wasn't there because I was here. But it was a very big protest. And there were, of course, were counter-protesters, but these folks outshined them. And the reason I mention it, well, not only because Muskegon's considering this, but because we are at, I believe, a tipping point in our nation. We have reached the point of what Nechayev talked about, that point of exhaustion, where we're ready to either give up or go into open revolt. We're at a tipping point in our society, so it's time for us, it's way past time, but it really is high time for us to decide. Are we going to capitulate? Are we just going to say, well, they won, they've got the media, they've got Hollywood, they've got all these corrupt people in power, they've got Dana Nessel now, good God.
Yeah. Jim?
Wow.
Yes, sir.
May I won't do this often, but we talked about connecting the dots in relationship to, it isn't just Muskegon, it's also Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids is a sanctuary city now.
Yep.
And yes, it is. And Jim, can you tell what that means for these communities?
Well, I was getting to that.
Spreading?
I was getting to that.
Yeah.
I was getting to that. So we're at a tipping point, and we need to decide: are we going to fight or lie down? I mean, we can fight and lose. The consequences are not going to be any different if we fight and lose or if we lie down and lose. The same end will result. So we might as well fight. And you know, here's the other thing, and it's easy to get into moments of despair. That happens to me, happens to all of us. Despair never won a single fight. And I am strengthened daily and reassured and able to continue with really none of that stuff bothering me, because I surrender daily to my higher power, who I call Jesus Christ. And I ask him for his power, because I can't do it on my own. And he gives it to me. And so I'm never bothered by that. Well, bothered, I get angry, but I don't get to the point of despair where I can't do anything. I just, no, I'm beyond it. And I think that's what we all need to do. We all need to pray. We need to pray for our country. We need to pray for ourselves. We need to pray for our forgiveness, because frankly, as a nation, we have totally abandoned God, and we've reaped the consequences. I always say, you're not punished for your sins, you're punished by your sins.
Yes.
You know, the very consequences. You drive through a red light constantly. Sooner or later, somebody's going to hit you. You know, of course, you're punished by the police later, but you're really punished by your sin, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
The same thing. Same thing. And so we have to ask forgiveness, and we have to ask God to listen. And I think he is. I think he is. I think in 2016, God gave us a judge. Just like the time in the book of Judges. God gave us a judge. And some of us have listened. And I hope more of us, enough of us, can listen and continue to listen, that we can restore our nation. There are 40 million Christians today who don't vote. That's a game changer. 15 million of them aren't even registered to vote. That right there should be our walking orders, our marching orders. Because the left is doing that. The Democratic Socialists of America are working to register 40 million voters. That's their goal this year.
Is that the church's fault?
Partially, yeah. Yeah, in a lot of ways.
They're afraid to mention politics.
Well, you know, there's so many things about that. That's a whole other issue. The 501c3 nonprofit status thing, which of course only applies to conservative churches, because a liberal churches, you know, politic all the time, and nobody calls them on it, right? And of course, the IRS is just saturated with leftists right up to the top leadership position. So, you know, that's our disadvantage. But in a bigger sense, the church has been infiltrated for decades by communists, by the left, and that's a whole other story I tell. And actually, you could read in an article I wrote called Michigan Faith Communities in the Crosshairs. It's at the Center for Security Policy website. It goes into great depth about how that whole thing happened. Anyway, but I don't really know enough time. So, and then the ACLU sent a letter to law enforcement warning them that they could face consequences if they did not buckle under the sanctuary city policies.
Why are we afraid of the ACLU?
Yeah, well, because they have about $500 million in assets. They have about $300 million a year in revenues. They have offices all over the country. They get paid by the government when they win cases.
I know.
Yeah. And they are largely, although not entirely, Roger Baldwin was a communist, and when he founded the ACLU, he said, communism is the goal. We're not a civil liberties organization. Communism is our goal. And then, of course, but what they do is they pepper their organization, or actually hire largely non-communists, people who are liberals, people who are civil, you know, have that kind of spirit, and that gives them the cover. That gives them the cover to continue their Marxist agenda under another name. Because really, what has the ACLU accomplished over its decades of business? It has undermined the rule of law. It has turned our nation towards a pro-criminal rather than pro-victim justice system. And if you read back there, that's all part of the Frankfurt School's agenda. You know, it's all part of the communist agenda. And it's turned our legal system into chaos as they find a pretext to sue and re-sue and appeal and appeal and appeal. And with the money rolling in, they can do this endlessly. And it's really an effort to subvert and undermine and create chaos in our legal system. That's what they're all about. They're a criminal organization as far as I'm concerned. They should lose their tax status and a lot of them should be arrested. So what's this thing about the sanctuary city? Let's focus on that specifically, because demographics is destiny. The Democrats, the left, the insiders say this, and they've said it repeatedly for decades. Demographics is destiny. Since the 1965 Immigration and Nationalities Act, promoted by Teddy Kennedy, but actually written by Bert Corona and his friends in the California Communist Party, the goal has been to open the floodgates of our immigration system to poor, uneducated, third world people from places all over the world that, of course, come here and become dependent. And as dependent people, who are they going to vote for? They're going to vote for that party that promises them free goodies, right? And that's what the Democratic Party has been doing over the decades. And that has its own agenda too, not to really help these people and lift them up, but to rather make them dependent on the government, while at the same time overburdening the government with welfare and other types of mandatory payments, which then again undermines its ability to pay for the things that government is actually supposed to do, like military and law enforcement, right? Because I worked for the Office of Management and Budget, the White House Budget Office, for 6 years. And I wrote budgets for, which was then the US Customs Service, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, all the Treasury Department's law enforcement, which subsequently was folded in the Department of Homeland Security. And they were always screaming for money. And they would get decent increases, but you went to the field office, and the field office, they were using 20-year-old computers. You know, they were in dusty warehouses. These people were really dedicated. You know, a lot of these law enforcement guys were really dedicated, and they did good work. And they had no money, because there was no sex appeal to what they were doing. And mandatory programs, which were a teeny component of the overall federal government in the 60s, before the Great Society under Johnson was created. Now welfare and Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all those comprise like over 70% of the total budget. And they are completely uncontrollable. And the other 30% has to make up the difference. And of course, the military becomes a big target of that, right? So it's all part of a strategy. It's an asymmetric military strategy for Congress and over to our nation. So this is just some statistics about where we are in this agenda. Demographics is destiny. And they say this, so I'm not just making this up. This is what insiders, Anna Broder, I think is her name, and John Podesta wrote a memo to wealthy insiders like George Soros and others. And this is their quote: "Ensure that demographics is destiny. An emerging progressive majority is a realistic possibility in terms of demographic and voting patterns." Okay, that's 2008. Now they have known this for a lot longer than 2008, let me tell you. And they visited that issue following the 2018 elections, which you remember were very close, even in places where it didn't seem like it should have been close, because demographics is destiny. They keep on importing people. You know, Hispanics, sorry to say, vote 70% or more Democrat consistently, and there's 30 million illegal aliens, not 11 million in this country today, and 25 million of those would vote Democrat, which would automatically give them a permanent ruling majority for the foreseeable future. And once they got that, I guarantee you that would be the last of our electoral system. They would rig it then so that it became a dictatorship. And that's really what they're looking for, because most of the top leaders in the Democrat Party are not Democrats, they're communists. And here's Alicio Medina, leader of the Democratic Socialists of America, labor leader, one of the foremost open borders agitators. 2009, you know, he was talking, 12 million people who were illegals then. Can you imagine if we have even 2 out of 3, if we had 8 million new voters, we would create a governing coalition for the long term. Permanent progressive majority, and I hate the term progressive because they're not progressive at all. Permanent communist majority is what they're talking about. One man, one vote, one time, just like Venezuela got. And what is the consequence? Well, she's the poster child for demographics is destiny, especially when it comes to illegal immigration. And it's outrageous because, she not only reflects what happens when we allow open borders, she reflects what happens when local agencies ignore ICE detainers. Because in San Francisco, they ignored the ICE detainer for this guy who had been deported 5 times and let him go. And a very short time after that, she was dead. And furthermore, the guy got off on a murder charge. He even got off on a weapons charge. That's the state of the judicial system in California. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. Those same judges are the ones who are stepping in the way of any effort Trump has made to control the border. It's all deep corruption, deep part of the agenda. And so here's a few statistics. Illegal alien crime. And this comes right out of the Government Accountability Office. Published last summer. These are statistics I got from them directly, the exact numbers. For homicide, in 5 states, those incarcerated for homicide, over 9,000. 21% of all illegal aliens incarcerated in those states were incarcerated for homicide. 21%. And of the overall homicides, all the prison population, it's about 10%. So it's either much higher than their representation in the population, or their representation in the population is much higher than the official statistics, either way. Look at sex offenses. Again, 21% of the total, over 9,000. And some of these are truly horrendous. You know, against children. There's something about the Mexican society that has a proclivity for young girls. Don't ask me about that.
Yeah.
But it's true, unfortunately. Look at this, Texas, illegal aliens between 11 and 18. Homicide, 1,600, kidnapping, 237,000 illegal alien crimes here. And Arizona, I like this because they monthly put out a statistic, and I could have updated this, I didn't have enough time. But for example, kidnapping, 18% of the criminals in Arizona prisons are illegal aliens imprisoned for kidnapping. 18%. Murder, 12.5%. Rape, sexual assault, 12%. So all of these sanctuary city folks say we don't have a problem with illegal alien crime. Are they out of their minds? They are guaranteeing that there will be illegal alien crime. In Montgomery County, you know, in Maryland, where they're protesting, Montgomery County and Prince George's County, the two of them, have more MS-13 gang members than any other state in the country.
What are MS-13?
Mara Salvatrucha 13, Salvadoran criminal gangs, some of the most violent. They were originally communist guerrillas. And then in the 1980s, some of them came to the United States illegally. A lot of people, I don't know how much you know, but 1/5 of the Salvadoran population came to the United States during the 1980s illegally, and assisted by the Catholic Church here and in El Salvador, even in El Salvador, evaluating their political proclivities so that when they sent them here, they would be sending leftists. The Catholic Church did that because the Catholic Church is divided between the conservative Catholic Church and the liberation theologists. The liberation theology is a KGB creation, communism applied to Catholicism, and it became big in Central America in the 1980s, and the Catholics down there adopted it. The Catholic priests, the Catholic nuns, they were all on the side of the communist revolutionaries. Anyway, you know, so whole other side I could spend an hour on. But so MS-13 was originally communist revolutionaries. They came here and created gangs. And of course, the communist revolutionaries are the most brutal, ruthless fighters anywhere in the world. I mean, anybody who was in Vietnam knows that. The Viet Cong, North Vietnamese, PAVN, they were absolutely monsters. They mass murdered people. They just gruesome, the things they did. Of course, our media never really reported to that here. But anyway, so Montgomery County has more MS-13 members than any other county in the country. And, you know, in 2012, I talked to the state police about this because they had gone after this guy. I wrote a long article about it, it's a whole nother story. But in the process, I said, you know, I'll be happy to publish the good thing you guys are doing. What are you doing against MS-13? And he said, MS-13? I said, yeah, do you realize that you have more MS-13 gang members in this state than any other state in the nation? He had no idea. They had not one case against MS-13. And the reason is because Montgomery County and PG County is basically run by a guy who came here from Nicaragua, a former Sandinista, who had originally fled from Colombia, whose brother was a communist murdered by the, some of the right-wing gangs in Colombia, and he fled so he wouldn't be killed, and he set up a program in Maryland called Casa de Maryland, which is basically this illegal alien front group, and I've written a lot about him, but anyway, he basically runs it. They call it community policing. And like that. And he shields all the MS-13 guys. So this is the kind of thing we're looking for. You're looking at, you talk about sanctuary cities. You're not merely talking about giving criminal aliens a free pass. You're talking about encouraging crime.
Yep.
Because once you have recognized officially that you're not going to enforce the law, everybody says, well, you're probably not going to enforce a bunch of other laws too, at least not against illegal aliens or criminals of any kind. Because why? That's actually their agenda, to upset our society. They also bring in all kinds of diseases. We now have leprosy reappearing in Los Angeles. You may have heard that. Ebola coming from the Congo and those other nations where it's now an epidemic. Plague. Enterovirus was responsible for killing and paralyzing children in 2014. I wrote 2 stories about that. Getting the information on that was like beating a dead horse. It just didn't work. AIDS, since 2010, when Obama opened the immigration to people with HIV, we've gotten about 4,700 a year coming in. Chagas disease, the kissing bug. Kissing bug used to only exist along the southwest border, and then in marginal places it's in 28 states now, and 50% of the kissing bugs have Chagas, which is a disease that eats your heart. It's a parasite that eats your heart. And there's 315,000 cases, mostly illegal aliens from Central America, and most of them actually in Northern Virginia. So the border crisis, we all know about that. And we saw a big drop when Trump was elected, but then when they figured out that he couldn't do anything about it, those numbers shot up. Now that he's enlisted the services of Mexico, they've gone back down, but back down in August was 64,000, which was the highest number we ever got in 2014, which was the prior surge, right? In 2014, we were outraged that we were getting up to 60,000 a month. Now, that's good news. It's insane. And that's all the open borders agenda, and it's designed to do all the things that are happening. The migrant caravans, this is the one that really infuriates me. Not only, the migrant caravans were not merely supported by these people, they were organized by these people. These things just didn't happen spontaneously. These people created it, they organized it, and then told these people to go. La Familia Latina Unida, founder Elvira Ariano, an illegal alien. She's still illegal, she's still here. Pueblo Sin Fronteras, Centro Sin Fronteras, Chicago-based organizations. Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, 80% government funded. They in turn fund these other ones. Catholic Legal Information Network, that's a big one. The National Immigration Forum. All of these. National Lawyers Guild, which is the Communist Front. However, the one that outrages me the most is that there are 5 UN agencies supporting the migrants in Central America. They provide buses, they provide housing, they provide food, they provide training. And the biggest one is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And so I've popped up the UN budget and what our contribution is. So there's the UNHCR's budget, US contribution is 37% of their overall budget. So we're paying for them to be down in Central America orchestrating this crisis. We're paying for that. And there's 4 other agencies, including UNICEF. Remember that? We used to collect pennies for UNICEF when we would go out trick-or-treating as kids. They're all just absolutely, utterly corrupt and dedicated to the communist takeover of the world, frankly. And you can see that also reflected in Russia and China's contribution to the UNHCR, which is 0.4% of their budget. It's a couple of $1 million that they provide. And of course, Russia and China have walls that nobody gets through. And you never hear anybody complaining about that. Why is that? Why is it only the West should open its doors and allow the floodgates? Why is that? Why has nobody complained that Eastern Europe has all put up walls? Israel put up a wall against the Palestinian territories. That since then, there have been 0 terrorist attacks in Israel proper. Walls work, and we all know that. And they know it too. That's why they're so adamantly against it, right? Now look at this. This is yet another consequence of open borders, sanctuary cities, and all the other immigration agenda. The U.S., there are more than 400 languages spoken in public school. How do you deal with that? Let's just see. Do we have somebody in, I don't have, I should have put something up from Michigan here because it's the same everywhere. But for example, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Nashville, Tennessee, 120 languages spoken by 30% of the student population in Nashville, Tennessee. How do you deal with that? Where do you find all the teachers to teach ESL? And what does it cost? It costs a couple grand per student. And that's just for ESL. All of them, most of them, have all kinds of secondary needs as well, for which they get government programs. And so, I have a friend who is a state legislator in Maine. She's on the State Board of Education. And a couple of years ago, Lewiston, Maine is target 1 for Somali refugees that had formerly lived in Georgia. And they send scouts around the country to find out where the best welfare programs are situated. And at that time, Maine was either number 1 or number 3, I forget. But anyway, so 5,000 Somalis moved in 1 year from Georgia to Maine, and almost all of them went to Lewiston, Maine. And I have the spreadsheet that shows all of them because one of the people in the town that worked for the town recorded it and gave it to me. But anyway, so their ESL program, their population went to about 15 to 20% Somali from 0. Their ESL program went from a couple of dozen students to 25% of the student body. The ESL program cost increased by 4,000% between 2001 and 2015. And she told me that in, I forget, 2016, 2017 or anything, they were told, the ESL program was told they were going to get 300 more people, 300 more students. And the director of the ESL program sat in front of those teachers who had to teach in 25 different languages and broke down and cried. In Michigan, the guy who directs the public education collaboration with the refugee resettlement program, he's a Syrian Christian, he told me that one elementary school that had 100 students was told they were getting 200 more refugee children as students. One elementary school. No budget, no teachers, no nothing. Triple the size of your school and deal with it. That's the kind of stuff that happens. That's the kind of stuff that happens. And they call us Islamophobes and xenophobes and bigots for objecting. When it's our kids whose education is being destroyed, when it's our schools that are being destroyed, and we're paying for it. It's outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous. And so that's, once again, going back to Chayav, increasing the miseries and the evils of people until at last their patience is exhausted. That's just a chart of legal immigration. Shows what happens in the 1986 amnesty. Whoops, big mistake there. Our amnesty, if we had one, would make a line that would go through the roof. 30 million. And here's just my showing of demographics as destiny. And it's unfortunate that so many minorities have been co-opted, basically paid, their votes have been purchased to vote for Democrats because they're destroying themselves in the process. You know, many have become government dependent, and it doesn't benefit anybody in the long run except for Democrats. And you can see how Democrats actually treat their constituents by looking at Los Angeles, looking at California, looking at Detroit, looking at all these cities that, San Francisco, I mean, you ever seen that map of all the excrement in San Francisco? The whole place is covered in brown. It's disgusting. They don't care. They want power, and they want wealth, and they know we hate them for it. So guess what? If they get that power and wealth, they're going to become very oppressive, because they have to be. They'll have to be to defend themselves against us. Which, of course, means we won't be able to have our guns, doesn't it? So, Texas, for example, is a minority-majority state today. And the only reason it's not a totally blue state is because Hispanics are registered at about 20%. And so if they register everybody like they're burning the bush to try to do, Texas could become a blue state in the next election or the election after that. And that will be the end of our presidential elections. There will never, ever be a Republican elected again. And, you know, it infuriates me that they have been able to divide us along racial and ethnic lines like this. Because, you know, honestly, a lot of Hispanics are conservatives. I worked for 5 years in prisons, counseling men on drug addiction and alcoholism, because I fell victim to it when I was a kid. They're some of my best friends. They're all conservative. They're all conservative. They all believe the same thing we do. Why? Because it's common sense. But when you have a choice, when you are living in poverty, when you are living on the margin, and your choice is between taking something that can help you survive today or blowing it off on the risk that you could improve your life later, what are most people going to do? It's just survival instinct. And that's what they do. But what does it do? It corrupts everything. It corrupts your soul. I go on to that for an hour because there was a whole agenda behind that. And I can name the people who promoted it. Their names were Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven. They created something called the crisis strategy. I wrote about it, and Glenn Beck used my materials to create a series of shows about them. You may have seen it. That was all my material. Anyway, we go on forever about that. But it's all the same story. And the reason why all these elections have been so close recently is because of the demographic shifts. Demographics is destiny. They say it, and they smile to themselves, because all we need to do is keep the borders open a while longer. We'll get the majority vote that we want, and that'll be the end of our country. And it'll be the end of our country for minorities as much, if not more, than the majority. Because they will no longer be getting those big welfare benefits, trust me. Because they won't be able to create the resources to provide them. The socialist country, it would take the world down. Now, I was talking about illegal immigration. Now I want to talk about the refugee resettlement program. Now, Trump has been able to reduce the numbers because he has authority over the refugee ceiling. He placed it at 45,000 in 2018, 30,000 in 2019. We're hoping he will make it 0 in 2020. And as a consequence, refugee annual numbers have come to historic lows. And he's done that with his, what he called extreme vetting, because prior to that, they weren't vetted, they were processed. Now they're vetted, and it's created a bottleneck, plus he's got the cap, which you can't go beyond anyway. So the numbers of refugees have come down substantially, but the problem is the refugee program is not the refugee program. That's the refugee program. You got special immigrant visas. That's a special kind of refugee from Iraq and Afghanistan for people who helped us during the war. And they really do deserve to be resettled, although there's a lot of fraud in that program, just like there's a lot of fraud throughout the entire program. The Cuban Haitian Entry Program, which has pretty much died with the open door to Cuba, but that's all kind of up in the air. There's the asylum program. That does not include the people on the border, just as people come to the United States requesting asylum from all over the world, trafficking victims, and the unaccompanied alien children program. And look at what's happened. This year, you know, that million is just a plug number I put in there based on what DHS said the children and families coming across the border apprehensions were. So it'll be less than that for actual children, but I don't know how much less. But it'll be a huge number. And the point is, even though Trump's brought refugees down a lot, the numbers on the overall program have stayed high. And here are the grants to the voluntary agencies, they call them. In Michigan, the subcontractor for the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services, Bethany Christian Services, they are actually responsible. There's 9 federal government contractors, nominally religious, 6 of them, not really, but with religious names. And there's about 350 subcontractors. And they claim that because of the reduction in refugees, that number went down by about 100 to 250 subcontractors. They're screaming bloody murder about it, but I don't think it's actually gone down that far, because a lot of them have been able to get subsidization from state governments, from other places, just so they can survive without actually doing any work. And in my book, I go into a specific example of that in Syracuse, New York, where the New York State Legislature subsidized the local Catholic Charities resettlement contractor, even though the Syracuse diocese had in reserve something in the billions of dollars. Crazy. But anyway, the 2 biggest VOLAGs are the International Rescue Committee and US Conference of Catholic Bishops. They went down substantially in 2018. Total went down a little bit in 2018. And then here are the UAC contractor grants. This is the Baptist Child Family Service and Southwest Key programs. $440 million in 2018. $626 million in 2018 for Southwest Key. That's for illegal alien minors, basically housing them. grants to the UAC program, 1.5 billion in 2018. The largest by far of all the resettlement programs. Crazy. And look at, it's not even the whole story, because the US conference, there they are, they get resettlement work for the illegal alien minors also, as do Catholic Charities and the Lutheran Immigrant Refugee Service. But look at this. So they got a total of 67.6 million in 2018 for their contract work on refugee resettlement, but they have all kinds of other programs that they administer for the federal government. So in 2018, the US conference got 561 million for all their various federal contracts. And since 2008, they got $4.3 billion. So if you wonder why the Catholic Church has gone totally off the rails, there's why. They're getting paid to.
That's right.
They're getting paid. They are government contractors required to do government work, and because they make so much money on it, they become agitators and promoters of those programs. They lobby for them. And who are they lobbying to? Who are they supporting? The radical left. And they are not, none of these religious organizations, quote unquote, are allowed to proselytize to anybody. So they all tell you, well, this is the way we can promote the Great Commission. No, you will be fined, or you lose your contract. It is illegal to proselytize as a federal contractor for these groups. So they're just federal contractors. And they've been paid billions, paid off. This is what's happening. It's infuriating. So that's just a rundown. Catholic Charities, even though they only got 14.1 million for the unaccompanied alien children, they got a total of 118 million in 2018 alone. Catholic Charities, as distinct from the U.S. conference. You know, each diocese is independent. But they're all government contractors, and they make all kinds of money promoting and administering all kinds of welfare programs. Public-private partnership, that term Obama loves so much.
Jim, is this a good time to take a break like we did last night momentarily?
Yes,
Okay.
great idea, thank you. If you want to get a little bit more insight into why they all support this so much, just take a look at how much these liberal administrators get for running these things. And I got to tell you, I mean, some of these are big organizations, but they're not organizations like a corporation where the leader actually has to have results. The leader actually has to produce something of value. You're administering a grant. You can do it in their sleep.
People do it.
Southwest, yeah, they have people to do it. Thank you. That's right. And in fact, the contractors have subcontractors to do the work. And the subcontractors get volunteers to do the work. And the volunteers actually contribute not only their time, but their money, so that subcontractors can get matching grants from the federal government. It's crazy. Look at that. Baptist Child and Family Services, Kevin getting $500,000 a year. That's a ministry I could get into, I think. I'll go back to school, divinity school, to get into that one, baby. $500,000, sure. It's really pretty outrageous. And this is interesting, Lavinia Limon, and it's a revolving door, because a lot of these people have been either in the Office of Refugee Resettlement in the Department of Health and Services, Human Services, or the Population and Refugee and Migration Office in State Department as directors or assistant directors, and then they get a job in the VOLAG, leading the VOLAG. They do that for a few years, and then they cycle back into the government, and it's this, incestuous back-rubbing type of operation where the same people cycled in and out of government and private service. Lavinia Limon no longer runs the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. Her second in command, who's a guy, his name escapes me at the moment, does now, but he was in the Office of Refugee Resettlement for off and on for 20 years. And then in one of these for long period of time. She, meanwhile, went to a refugee subcontractor called Immigrant and Refugee Services of America, IRSA. Now, IRSA does not publish a 501c3 IRS tax return like they're required to. It has lists in office, or at least I found an office listed in Washington, D.C., but repeated calls to it. It was busy all the time, and not busy like somebody was actually on the phone, but busy like it was disconnected, you know, like beep, 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 all the time, all day. Nobody's there, nobody's home. Yet, IRSA, her organization, has made $100 million the refugee program over the last 10 years. There's no record of it. There's no record of it. It's a subcontractor for the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, but there's no record of it anywhere. These are the kind of things that are going on. It's not only subversive, it's also very corrupt. And I think if we launched investigations into these organizations, that's corruption would surface very quickly. Welfare, refugees use welfare at astronomical rates. This is for just the first 5 years. After 40 years, they are still using welfare at rates higher than American citizens. And finally, after Trump was elected, this was some of the light that came into some of these programs after President Trump was elected. This is the first time that the Office of Refugee Resettlement has ever published anything like this. It tells expenditures by program for refugees and asylum seekers for various public welfare programs. For 10 years, 25 to 2014, that's $125 billion. So 12.5 or actually 12.6 billion a year. It comes out to about 3,000 per refugee, okay? This doesn't sound like too much, except that look at what they haven't included. These are all other costs that we have to bear for refugees, asylum seekers, unaccompanied illegal aliens, and others. Well, maybe not illegal aliens, because most of the stuff they can't collect, although they still collect some of it anyway. So I got numbers for a few. Supplemental security income, $2,000 per head. Food stamps, $1,000 per head. Federal housing, $500 per head. So right there, you're doubling it to $6,500 per head. And that's just for those 3 additional programs. You add all these other programs, what does it come to per head? 15, 20, 25, 30,000 a head? Who knows? It's off the charts. Refugees make on average about $10 an hour, okay? That entitles them to welfare.
Yep.
So what really happens is the companies are paying less per hour, but we are subsidizing the companies with welfare. So the actual hourly rate is about the same as what they would have to pay no matter what, but they're being subsidized by taxpayers now because the taxpayers cover the welfare. That's what's happening. And so it's all a shell game. It's all a dodge. It's all a fraud. So the next agenda here, we talked about this, is welcoming America. Now this is an influence operation. That's what it is. Here's a advertisement. On the Welcoming Michigan website, there's welcoming pretty much every state, and then there's welcoming cities. This is all a program started under the Obama administration. First it was the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, and its leader, a guy named by David, oh well, I forget his last name, but anyway, and so that became the template for Welcoming America, which got federal government money. And the idea was to arm twist communities into becoming welcoming places for immigrants and refugees, including illegal aliens and refugees. And of course, if you're not welcoming, you're what?
A bigot.
A bigot, a racist, a xenophobe, et cetera, right? And so what they do is they get people in a room, they get all of the beneficiaries, like the Catholic Charities or whatever the refugee contractor is, in a room. They get a bunch of lefties in the room, and then they get some clergy in the room, and then they get a few fools who are willing to go in and think they could change some minds. And the fools object for all the reasons that are legitimate reasons to object, and one of two things happen to them. They have voiced their concerns, so now they've vented, and they're welcomed into the community, and we understand your concerns, however, and so the natural inclination for people that don't know this is an influence operation with a predetermined outcome, fall for it, and become friendly, and they all become friends, and they eat some food, and have a nice time, and everybody's buddies, and there's some refugees to tell them how grateful they are that they're now welcoming, or they don't buy the line, and then what happens to them? They're excommunicated. They're the bigot, they're the racist in the room, forget it, That's the way it worked. It's called the Delphi technique. It was developed by Rand Corporation to encourage consensus building, right? But it's really manipulation, psychological manipulation. And this is what they say about it. This is right out of the Welcoming America thing. David LaBelle, that's the founder. He's a young guy. He thinks he knows more than he knows. His team engaged members from both groups to participate and lead a good welcoming events. Spaces where they can openly discuss their fears and build trust-based relationship with foreign-born U.S. residents. These carefully crafted interventions lead to significant shifts in attitude. Okay? That's the goal.
Sure.
Carefully crafted interventions. They're strictly controlled, and this is all of their guidelines. New Americans, in other words, immigrants and refugees, should be involved. So you have a face to look at where you're trying to complain about what happens when you bring the face to look at into the community, right? It makes it very difficult when you put a human face on that, right? Integration is a two-way process. So, of course, they listen. Oh, we're happy to listen to you. We just think you're totally full of it. We will shut you out if you don't agree with us. Coalitions are among the vehicles that can foster effectiveness and meaningful. I mean, you can see it. And this is my favorite part. They base it all on a horrible misapplication of religious doctrine, welcoming the stranger. My favorite line is from Matthew, where Jesus said, when I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. And those who did that to the least of these, my brethren, that's a winner. But what they don't explain is that these least of these, my brethren, are Christian brethren. And he's talking about himself. He's not talking about hordes of illegal aliens coming across the border being paid for by tax dollars. He's talking about Christians helping Christians. That's what it's about. And in fact, the way they explain it, it's, in my mind, and this is how I describe it in the book, it's more like what Judas did when Mary poured spikenard oil on Jesus' feet, right? Well, why would you waste that? We can use it for the poor, when really all he wanted to steal it for himself, right? And that's exactly what they're doing here, right? I mean, it's completely polar opposite. And if any Christian pastor supports this thing, I look at them and I say, well, you, sir, should know better. You should know that Jesus Christ warned that anyone who misleads their people, it would be better for them if a millstone were wrapped about their neck and they were tossed into the sea. So either you're utterly ignorant of what Christian doctrine is, or you are not a believer and you're just not a believer and you're pretending to be. Yeah, because I mean, if you were a believer, you wouldn't want that to happen. You would believe that could happen to you, and you wouldn't want it to happen. And Isaiah, I like Isaiah 1:7. What it describes, what happens when you open the doors to illegal aliens. So it's an influence operation, and it misapplies biblical concepts to manipulate people, including Christians, I would say especially Christians, into supporting them, because 6 of the 9 refugee contractors are nominally Christian: Lutheran Immigrant and Refugee Services, World Relief Corporation, Catholic Charities, or U.S. Conference Catholic Bishops,
Bethany Christian Services.
Bethany Christian Services, yes, and Lutheran Social Services. There are so many of them. But they're not Christian. They're not religious even. There's Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which was the oldest refugee program, and it did bring in Jews who were fleeing Nazis in World War II. But now they've flipped. They're all extreme left-wing. They don't even accept Judaism. The leader, who is a Jewish leftist, he refuses to use the term Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society because Hebrew is exclusionary and outmoded. So they're now HIAS Inc., the acronym. But so it's all a fake out. And they use Christians, they use Christian volunteers to do most of the work, frankly. And now, I don't know if you all hear about this, the Baptist Church in Bloomfield Hills that I was going to speak at Thursday night. And along with my friend Sharam Hadian, who is a former Iranian Muslim turned Christian pastor. He's one of the most powerful apologists I've ever heard in my life. Anyway, Local News 7 quotes Nada al-Hanuti, who's the executive director of M-Gage, Maryland, which is a new Muslim Brotherhood organization that's trying to get a lot of Muslims elected to public office at the state and federal level. But you know, who was she? Her father was jailed for spying for Saddam. Her grandfather was an indicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation trial. Do you think has a different mindset? No. And she claimed, pardon?
What is ACLU? What is that?
Holy Land Foundation. Holy Land Foundation trial, largest terrorist financing trial in the United States history. And it was, these...
Now, some of that stuff is in your book, is that correct?
Yes, these Islamic charities were collecting money under charitable, 501c3 nonprofit status and shipping it to Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist group. She claims speech is incitement. Now, where did she get that idea? Well, here's another guy, Issam Omish, and he's an interesting guy. He is the head of general and laparoscopic surgery at Alexandria Nova Hospital in Northern Virginia. Don't lose your head over it. he says, and this is one of his Facebook posts, he's also founding member of the Dar al-Hijra Mosque, where Anwar al-Awlaki was the preacher, was the imam for many years. The guy who mentored the Fort Hood shooter. The Fort Hood shooter visited him in that mosque. Two of the 9/11 hijackers visited that mosque. Awlaki later went to Yemen, where he was killed in a drone strike. But that's the kind of jihadi mosque that was. And as someone pointed out to me, most of these jihadis are just practicing Islam as Islam is written. You know, we call it radical Islam because it's kind of a bridge too far for a lot of people to think that an established religion, as it is, would be radical. So it goes outside of a lot of people's frame of reference. But it's the reality for almost every mosque in this country, and for that matter, overseas. Anyway, so he is also a member of the Muslim Students Association, leader in the Muslim American Society. These are all Muslim Brotherhood front groups. So he says anyone who uses the following terms is Islamophobic and must stop their hate. Islamic terrorism, Islamic terrorists, Islamic violence, jihadists, blah, 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 blah. All these things. It's ludicrous. You know, remember, you all know who Ayman al-Zawahiri is? The guy who leads Al-Qaeda now? He was the second in command for a long time. Does anybody know the organization that he came out of? It was called Egyptian Islamic Jihad. So Ayman al-Zawahiri is an Islamophobe. I mean, it's that crazy, right? You can't talk about Islamic terrorism, you talk about Islamic terrorists. Meanwhile, there's Al-Shabaab, there's ISIS, there's Al-Qaeda, there's Boko Haram, there's the group in Philippines, I forget their name. There's just, it goes on and on and on and on. Well, if these groups aren't Islamic terrorist groups, then Islam has to be the most misunderstood religion in the entire history of the world, right? Because, okay, line up here in the front. I want to see the evangelical shoe bombers, all right? I want to see the Lutheran underwear bombers over here. Come on. I'm waiting for the Mennonite terrorists to show up. It's ludicrous. And, you know, this is where we're confronted with this stuff, because Islamophobe, just like xenophobe, just like homophobe, just like every phobe in the world, is a made-up term designed specifically to discredit, defame, insult, and marginalize us. What the purpose is. That's all it is. However, it has a very virulent origin. The Organization for Islamic Cooperation, 56 nations plus the Palestinian territories, organization, second largest intergovernmental organization in the world, next to the UN. They've rejected the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights, saying that speech and other rights must be Sharia compliant, and they've imposed that on the OIC nations. And they've been trying to insert blasphemy speech codes against Islam into international law since then. And they accomplished it indirectly with UN Resolution 1618, which, among other things, the title includes intolerance, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of religion and belief, and incitement, that's in there too.
Well,
and of course,
religion, not Christianity.
well, as we all know, the UN has no regard for Christianity. They want to see Israel wiped off the map. They could care less about Jews or Judaism. So, of course, it's Islam and only Islam. And that was those concepts were also included in the UN Migration Compact, which was signed by a bunch of nations last November. Our country, as with 1618, declined to sign, which is a big deal because the UN Migration Compact included actual requirements for signatory nations to adopt hate speech laws. And here's what a European Parliament member said about it. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. It already is in many Western European nations. You can't talk about, they have migrants coming in, they have terrorism every day, they have knife attacks, they have rapes, but you can't talk ill of migrants or you're guilty of incitement. And incitement, the blasphemy code in Islam, say anything bad about Islam or Muhammad, and you are inciting violence. So if a terrorist attacks you, it's your own fault. It's your own fault for inciting violence. And that's why that statement by Al-Hanoudi, that woman, is so significant, because these are all the narrative of the Islamic movement in this nation, the Muslim Brotherhood groups, and the others that are associated with them, including the left. And so, as I said, blasphemy laws already exist in Europe, some of them for a long time. And this person, a friend of mine, was prosecuted because she said that Muhammad had a proclivity for young girls because he married Aisha when she was 6 and consummated it when she was 9. She said that privately, but somebody recorded it, took it to a prosecutor. They prosecuted her first for defamation of religion, and of course, she was just telling the truth, so under their law, they couldn't prosecute her for that. So the judge dreamed up another crime, incitement, and he convicted her of that. She appealed to the Vienna Supreme Court. They denied her appeal. She appealed to the European Court. They denied her appeal. So she has to face a fine or go to prison. Where we are, and it's coming here. So what is the Council on American-Islamic Relations? This is important to know this, because I think probably many of you already do. But let's just clarify. It was created in Philadelphia at a secret meeting in 1993 as the U.S. branch of the Hamas terrorist group. And Nihad Awad, the current director, was president in that meeting. A year later, in public, he said, I'm supportive of Hamas more than the PLO. He had been a student leader in the PLO, which marks him as a communist, because the PLO was a communist organization created by the KGB. So he was a communist before he was a radical Muslim, for lack of a better way to put it. He's a perfect example of the red-green axis personified. CAIR is an unindicted co-conspirator in the Holy Land Foundation terrorist violence trial. The only reason they're unindicted, the only reason CAIR exists today, is because when President Obama was elected, he shut down the investigation, ended that trial. There were a bunch of Muslim charities that were defunded, that were shut down. A bunch of people went to jail, but CAIR escaped prosecution like many, many, many others did, because Obama shut down the investigation. The investigation could be rekindled, should be rekindled, and they should all be shut down. Because they're all terrorist organizations as far as I'm concerned, even though they don't use physical terror directly. They use lawfare, defamation, fraud, and CAIR officials have been convicted of terrorism. This guy was sentenced to 65 years. This guy quit CAIR to join Lashkar-e-Taiba. You know them. They staged the Mumbai attacks in 2008. They're the ones who attacked that hotel and killed like 150 people. He joined them. This guy, Haddad, fundraiser for CAIR Ann Arbor, deported as a substantial risk to national security. Siraj Wahaj, he's still walking around as an unindicted co-conspirator in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, and his son was the head of that group in Arizona that was training children to become jihadis, and his own son died there. 3-year-old son died of neglect.
5 minutes, Jim.
Okay. Ah, a white nationalist. Here we have him, clearing a terrorist cell here in Minneapolis. He must be an Islamophobe. This is a judge who prosecuted and convicted 9 Somali youths who were either had joined or were trying to join al-Shabaab. And he said that publicly in court because they really did. And here's the shocker. The Somali Muslims in Minneapolis were outraged at CAIR's actions because CAIR, according to them, was facilitating the recruitment of their children to fight for ISIS and al-Shabaab. And these are their public statements supporting the groups we suspect of recruiting our kids. We refused to be silent. CAIR warned them, told them not to speak to the FBI and tell them what was going on. This is CAIR. Terrorists supporting, if not a terrorist organization itself. Protesters at a big rally shouted CAIR out, double speak. These were all Somali Muslims. In 2013, al-Shabaab attacked the Westgate Mall in Kenya, killing 67 non-Muslims. At least 2 of the attackers were Somalis. Ibrahim Hooper said, and he's the spokesman for CAIR, he said, terrorism, whatever, it's American involved, or even from any nation or back. Who cares? Who cares? And this guy, Abdurazak Bihi, his nephew, who joined al-Shabaab, was murdered because he had second thoughts. They weren't just going to let him go, they made an example of him. And he said, I tried to warn America. He testified before Congress. He said, CAIR say that I'm a bad person, I'm anti-Muslim, I don't represent the Somali community, they lie about my life, try to destroy my character, my capability, and my trust in the community, and CAIR called him an Islamophobe in one of their Islamophobia reports, which I've also written about and deconstructed at the Center for Security Policy, something you should look up and read. It's pretty good if I do say so myself. But where do these hate American tactics come from? These are Leninists. They came from Lenin. This is what he said. We can and must write in a language which sows among the masses hate, revulsion, and scorn towards those who disagree with us. And in the 40s, the Soviet Union sent out messages to the Communist Party of the world saying, communists constantly associate those who oppose us with those that already have a bad smell, like fascist, Nazi, or anti-Semite. That was in the 1940s. That's what they were yelling at us then. So this is nothing new. This is an old, well-established strategy. And how we got it is through Herbert Marcuse. He was a member of the Frankfurt School. He's the father of the New Left. He inspired the Students for a Democratic Society. He influenced the Black Panther Party. He mentored Angela Davis, seen here. He said that intolerance towards us, even toward thought, opinion, and word, that's intolerance towards us. And he created a concept called partisan tolerance. He is also the father of the sexual revolution. He wrote a book called Eros and Civilization, where he advocated polymorphous sexuality to make sex a political act. And that's what inspired the Flower Children movement, all of that stuff. He's associated with the term make love, not war. Anyway, he created this partisan tolerance concept, which argued that because America is so racist, sexist, bigoted, imperialistic and capitalistic, it has to be shammed, it has to be silenced, so we should engage in partisan tolerance, which is tolerance of the left's ideas, intolerance of the left's speech, and complete intolerance of the right. That's what it is. And then Saul Alinsky turned that into the rules for radicals. But it was Marcuse that did this. Now, why is Marcuse important? Because Marcuse worked with the co-founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Julian Bond, in the National Council of New Politics, and in founding, in these times, communist newspaper, both communist organizations. They worked together. Marcuse introduced that concept to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And ever since, the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate watch, hate list, hate map, all that stuff that is Leninist, partisan tolerance. That's what it is. So, Leninist, Southern Poverty works with the Institute for Policy Studies, which has been called the KGB Front. They publish articles in Workers' World, the communist magazine. They inspired domestic terrorists Floyd Corkins and Jane Hodgkinson, both attacked, groups based on the SPLC's hate list. They inspire Antifa hate tactics. They defend Antifa while vilifying Antifa's opponents. And we have people like, now we have Dana Nessel, who's created this state hate crimes task force. And I was told last night, I didn't know this, that she had been a former board member of the Southern Poverty Law Center. But they are using the SPLC's hate list, which includes people who have been very, very effective at going after CAIR. See, there's also this really legitimate reason for them to do all this, is to destroy their enemies, because their enemies are effectively exposing them, and in many cases in court, beating them to a pulp. CAIR has been beaten every single time in court by the American Freedom Law Center based out of Michigan. And American Freedom Law Center, guess what? It's a prominent member of the hate list, prominent member of the list on Nessel's watch list. So it goes on and on. There's a lot more about it, but not the end yet. There's my book. Get my book, please. I need the money. Crisisnow.net is my, well, it's sort of a website. It's really just an archive spot for a lot of articles. And you go read the Center for Security Policy, has this article in it, the one on CAIR's Islamophobia report, which is really pretty funny. I wish we had time to go through it. And many others. So thank you all for coming, and thanks for letting me take so much of your time.